We're going to play Staffy Roulette. And what you're going to do is you're going to put whatever... Courtney's just about to vomit. Okay. To put everyone at ease, Staffy Roulette today, I will be the speaker. However, you get to drop your subject that you would like me to preach on, speak on, teach on in the comment section. And then Gio is going to scroll, put his finger down, and on whichever one it is, I will speak for our Staffy. And if I can't speak on it for too long, I've got backup, but we're going to just do Staffy Roulette.
This is fun. This is fun.
So, everybody, right now, if on the count of 3, I want you to go into the comment section and you're going to drop what you want to be spoken about at Staffy today. And I'm going to give you 30 seconds. Let me get my timer up because we are nothing if we are not precise here. Right, Jimmy? All right, ready? 30 seconds starts now. Drop your subject in the comment section and Staffy Roulette shall begin.
That's for everyone.
Do you still nominate people though?
No, I'm the one that's speaking. I know. I know if you heard that part, Jimmy. Today we're speaking on listening.
That's it. Ego. Okay. I like it. Spiritual covering.
I think all you should be preaching Staffy by your titles. Dang.
Practicing the great presence of God. Okay. Between fighting for them and letting go. Nice. Tips for creating.
Oh, yeah. That's such a brainer.
I like it.
All right. I'm giving it a little longer because they're all coming in. All right, we're going 14 seconds. We went a whole minute. Staffy Roulette. Then Gio, you're going to scroll through or do however you do. Just randomly going to pick one.
Unity. Weapons for battle.
All right, there it is.
Man,
Time
these
is
are
up.
So good.
These are all good. I should preach on them every week.
Copy the whole list. Yeah. All right, come on, Gio.
Yeah, save these combos too. Like they seem to be pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Go, Gio, go. That's a good.
What about Elias?
Yeah.
His randomizing is actually close to his. Come on.
All right, the first one is weapons for battle, spiritual, physical, mental.
Well, all right, done. Weapons for battle, spiritual, physical, and mental. All right, guys. Let me just write that title so I can come back to it for a second. Weapons for battle, spiritual, mental. I don't need to write it. Weapons for battle, spiritual, mental, and physical. You know, I think this is actually a really, really great subject because I think one of the things that we as like Christians often underplay is the fact that we are in a battle.
Yeah.
I think the majority of what we do is we come into this thing, this Christian living, this building a church, and we come in from the perspective of God bless me. It comes into where we start really. We're lost, right? And we're looking for salvation and we find God, we find redemption, and all this great stuff happens. The reality though is that we don't often realize that we were born into a battle. Yeah. And so one of the things that as humans I think we're innately aware of is the presence of God, the reality of God, the sovereignty of God. So we tend to align with that fact and we blame God on a lot of things, right? We don't often know how to navigate the bad in our world, the things that don't make sense. We don't know how to navigate the days on our dream that we're running towards, that God has given us, that are going to be difficult. We just don't assess those things. And the reality, before we jump any further into this subject, I want to put out there that what we live in at the moment is this now and not yet. So we live in the now and the not yet, meaning the now, Jesus paid the price, everything is done, the battle has been won, all blessing and favor is ours. But it's also, we live in this aspect of the not yet. It's an unfolding reality that we are walking into, but we know it's guaranteed, so it's now, but yet we're walking into some things. The byproduct of that is that evil still exists in this time that we live. And I think if we just want to create blame around God for all the bad seasons, trials, and troubles, without understanding that there is actually evil in this world that is present until the return of Jesus, where he takes care of business and we go home with him and all that great stuff. Like until that happens, we live in this kind of duality. But the reality is as well that we've been given authority, we've been given keys and weapons and things of that nature. And so I want to kind of just put out there that the first thing we've got to understand is that we were plunged into a battle. I was joking with Jimmy when he first came, and I was like, man, the way we started this church was genuinely, we showed up to a gunfight with a plastic spork, and not only that, I dropped it, and I was like, excuse me, can you wait till I pick it up? That was the way we started this church, right? Full of faith, full of all the great stuff, but we had no idea what we were showing up to. And so I think this subject is fantastic because I think that you need to make sure that you understand what weapons you fight with in all of those areas, mental, spiritual, and was it physical as well? Physical space. So let's start with the easiest of them all, and we'll start with physical. And we'll start with physical for the simple fact that I think that there is this great statement that I would stand by, which is first the physical, then the spiritual. Meaning that what we do physically, it's like when I stop and pull myself away and go pray, I actually start influencing what's happening in the spiritual. So we don't often understand that we've got to wrestle our flesh. So I think weapon number one is bring your flesh under control.
That's good. Good.
Yeah.
Have a good workout regime. Learn to actually have a healthy eating plan that you stick to. Practice limits. Practice boundaries. Actually put your body under submission, because the body is the greatest interferer to the spirit.
Yes.
It is what you are experiencing physically that typically is in competition with what God wants to do in your life spiritually. We hunger to get into the presence of God, but we don't have the discipline to leave the things that we are doing physically quite often. It's the small things like, I want to hang out till all hours, but the reality is you're never going to have an early morning prayer life if that's what you do. It's the things of, every emotion is exasperated when you're tired. The problem isn't getting up early. The problem is getting to sleep early. So how do you get physical things in order? How do you create boundaries in your life that are going to help? If you don't feel good, you're adding to the pile of problems that are going to be facing you every single day. And I don't always get this right. And the reality is it's one of my greatest struggles. And I think for all of us, but every season where I lock in on these things, it changes everything in my life. To the point though, I still always have a tight grasp on a few things, because if I don't, it eventually takes its toll. So, super practical things, but they matter, because often I think as well, what I love about the physical is, often we love to pray about something that we could be practical about. So how do you practically make sure you've got a good sleep schedule? How do you practically know that you've got a good diet? How do you practically make sure you exercise? The Apostle Paul said, I buffet my body daily so that I would not be disqualified from the very thing that I'm preaching to the people daily. So what Paul, his assertion in that is simple. I could preach all day long, but if I don't have discipline in my physical being, it will be that which actually stops me from getting to where I want to go. So one of the battles there, I think, is make sure that your body is actually serving you, not you serving your body. Don't serve your appetite, make your appetite serve you. Bring it under control. And one of the things I often say as well is, if you have not pushed yourself to physical exhaustion and failure, you will not be able to glean what it looks like to fight spiritual battles.
So true.
One of the greatest things you could learn is that God birthed us from a supernatural place into a physical place, but the physical place does take its cues from a spiritual place. So when you realize that pushing your body is another great way to learn how to actually push into the spiritual, when you learn what it's like to reach your max and then realize you've got even further to go, what that does in your spiritual life, in your discipline, in your mental, is massive. My next thing is this. I'll say just on that, have a good exercise regime, but maybe once a quarter, push yourself to failure. Once a quarter, pick a workout that'll push you to failure. Why? You're not going to feel any different on that day than you will on the day that you want to get out of ministry, your calling, business, your marriage. We live in this sensory experience. And it is our sensory experience that often wants us to quit.
Yeah.
We physically feel tired. We don't know what it's like to push through. We don't know our limits because we've never pushed them.
Yeah.
And when you haven't pushed a limit, you're often afraid of pain.
Yes.
Yeah. That's good.
And when you're afraid of pain, you start to quit when you actually just have to realize that it is the strain of pushing into something new. So I want to put just a suggestion out there for anyone. If you don't have a model of something that will really test you, there's a pyramid run that I would put out there that always tests my heart space, my head space. Like, just, it teaches me, it puts my body back in check, and it is a pyramid run. You're going to do a 400 meter sprint, 30-second break, 400 meter sprint, 30-second break, 800 meter sprint, 45-second break, 1200 meter sprint, minute 30 break, 800 meter sprint, 45-second break, 400 meter sprint, 30-second break, 400 meter sprint, finish. All of it at 90% of your top capacity. The reality is you're not going to stay as fast by the last lap as you were on the first, but the effort needs to stay the same.
Yes.
I think it's a great indicator for seasons that we're tired. Sometimes it's not about always running at our best, but being able to sustain effort is an incredible lesson that is taught. I think that is one of the greatest weapons that you could get in the physical. And then the last weapon in your physical is rest to the fullest. What I mean by that is this. You can charge your battery on your phone or fuel your car $10 at a time or 10% at a time, and it won't last as long as a full charge overnight.
Right.
I want to encourage you, create a Sabbath day for yourself. And what Sabbath looks like is only things that feed you, fuel you spiritually and emotionally, relationally and physically. You don't look at your emails, you don't work, you don't try do strategic work for work. You sit in the presence of God, you sit amongst the community that God has blessed you with, and you completely refuel. Most of us are tired because what we like to do is actually spread our work across all 7 days, and therefore we don't have a full day of recharge. Your mind doesn't get an opportunity to recoup, and neither does your soul. And I think because we don't rest often, we actually end up breaking later. So one of the most powerful things you could do is rest. You could call it whatever's going to work for you. Rest to win, rest because it's a command from God. But I want to encourage you, more people leave ministry because they don't know how to rest, not because the work is difficult.
Yes. Yeah.
Back to the pyramid run. Your last lap of 400, your last 100 meter sprint from the 400, you're going to go so much slower. The ground didn't change, the distance didn't change. You're just tired. The whole idea of that exercise, by the way, is it increases your recovery super quick, so that basically you can play sprinting sports, football, soccer, tennis in a in a much better way. But the truth is it still relies on rest, and when you rest, it basically builds your capacity for more running. So I want to encourage you, if you're not resting well, it's probably the reason you're so tired. Okay, second, spiritually. I think the first spiritual thing is, I'm going to steal one from Chris Hodges that I heard this week. Don't go more than 3 days without a revelation from God.
Yes, come on. It's great. It's good.
I think too many of us confuse activity with authenticity. So we do a lot of spiritual activity so we can check it off the list. Some of you are disciplined, and that is awesome. But just because you're disciplined, you basically, the downfall of that sometimes in spiritual things is that you're so disciplined that you're going to show up whether you're fully present or not present, you're going to be there. The problem is you're not going to gain something from it. And so the idea to challenge ourselves to have a fresh revelation every 3 days, it means that you don't only want to read 5 pages of the Bible, you want to actually digest half a page. You want to dig for gold in half a page versus downloading 5 million pages. It's not about shredding through the word for the sake of it. It's about getting something and really understanding. And my experience of revelation is it has to be dug for. You got to dig into every verse, and then you've got to sit before the verse, which the Bible says the word of God is alive and living. And as you sit face to face in the presence of the written word, God starts to work and open up. Something starts to shift. That's how you gain revelation. I want to encourage you that revelation is so much different than spiritual activity.
Yeah.
Don't just sit there ticking boxes. Actually get something from it. Make sure every 3 days you're getting something from God. I think that is like absolutely crucial. The next spiritual weapon I think we have that we often underutilize is community. We don't call that a spiritual weapon, but the reality is there's enough biblical precedents to suggest that our greatest spiritual health is always amongst the body of believers. Because there's certain things spiritually that happen that can't happen somewhere else. When you are with the body of believers, there's a thing called fellowship, which is the transference between two believers that are stuck and steadfast in the presence of God. Based on those convictions, you guys will speak into each other's soul in a much different way than you can anywhere else. Name the last time. Think of the most impactful times in your life. It was like a ministry moment. Someone gave you a word. It was when two or more were gathered praying for each other and it fed you. I think we often go first to prayer, which is 100% important. The Bible tells us that. But I think one of the overlooked weapons is that community. Community changes things. The amount of times that I've been about to run into a spiritual battle that I was unaware of, but my community prophesied, spoke into, prayed into, prepped for me, that gave me a heads up before I was even there, is like countless. When was the last time you made sure that you've got a spiritual community that you're really connected with? And when I mean connected, you actually share a word from each other. When you're getting those revelations every 3 days, you share them. They know you. They pray for you. Not only do they pray for you, they challenge you. Like they spiritually challenge you. When was the last time they were like, hey, I haven't heard you say anything like spiritual in a minute? When was the last time they looked at your fruit and like challenged it and you were like, ooh. Like if all we do is get together and laugh and all we do is get together and hang out and watch TV, football and chat and do our nails, whatever the heck everyone does, you're leaving so much benefit on the table of an actual Christian relationship. And by the way, that's got to be sought after, not something that just happens. You've got to choose to carve that out in your relationships. Like, just when was the last time you and your friends just grabbed a coffee, drove by the lakeside after church, because you can still get fed more after church, and just sat and talked? And gave each other words. Challenge yourselves to use spiritual gifts, because it's in that context that you realize if a spiritual gift was on or off. Because you've got this safe place, and I think a lot of us loved community for what it offers us in our interests, but not in the things that interest the kingdom and God and are actually going to propel us forward. Your greatest spiritual weapon is to forge an army, not stand alone as a lone warrior. That is one of the greatest things you could go into battle with. The second thing is, I think I would hold, even beyond prayer, the Word of God. Don't just understanding your spiritual rights is where faith comes from. And I would just put a challenge out there. Do you have 10 verses from memory that you can quote? You can cite 10 verses right now, and you could be like, Malachi 3 verse 10, Psalm 144, Psalm 139, if you can do that, you're in a great place. And not only that, you could preach at least 4 messages on them. Because if they're the only ones you've remembered, why did you remember them? Did you remember them because God, they were a God moment for you? And therefore, have you dug into them and got everything you can out of them? Do you continue to pour into them? We put more effort into things that will not help us on the battlefield than we do to the things that actually are sword in our hands. And so I want to encourage you, the Word of God is, I think, a great spiritual practice. And then lastly, I think speaking in tongues. Speaking in tongues is the greatest weapon that you could actually ever, I think, have. The reason is that it is prayer that is not filtered through your brokenness, but through a direct connection of the Spirit. And when you pray in tongues, there's a different level of power, there's a different level of transference, and there's a different level of effectiveness. It starts to align things in you that you didn't even know were there. It prays powerful prayers. And I'm not saying these are the only spiritual weapons. I just think they're some of the most spiritual weapons that you could ever kind of like encounter. I think they're crucial. One last spiritual practice I want to put in there is stay looking for perpetual growth.
Yeah.
Yes.
Really fight against a rival mentality.
Yeah.
Ask yourself, like I've been praying more and more lately, Psalm 139, last 3 verses of the Psalm. It says, search my heart, O God, see if there's any offensive way within me. Test my anxious thoughts and guide me on straight paths.
Yes.
Honestly, it's a dangerous prayer. This last ARC conference I was at was the most uncomfortable 3 days because even when I was at the sessions or not at the sessions, God was doing something in me.
Right.
And the reason is, it was always there, but God has a better ability to search your heart than you do.
Yeah.
So one of the greatest prayers you could pray is, God, search my heart.
Yeah.
Find if there's an offensive way in me. Know and test my anxious thoughts. Lead me on straight paths.
Yeah.
And then the last one is mental. I would say this, put great boundaries around where your mind will go.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thoughts, we don't often treat our thoughts the same way we treat our body. In that you wouldn't walk into certain environments because you know they'd be harmful
Yeah.
or that you wouldn't survive in them.
Yeah.
Right? Like, let's say, let's say you struggle with either you got relational, alcoholic, or promiscuity, like trouble. Like you've just struggled with that. You're not about to go to Vegas. Do you know what I mean? Like you're not going to Florida on spring break,
Yeah.
right? Like it's just not, you wouldn't put your body there.
Yeah.
Right.
But we don't do that with our thoughts.
Right.
Our thoughts can be in places that no one would ever be aware of while we're sitting in this very room.
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
That's right.
Our thoughts go places that we just never would want to go. The problem is this, that I said it on Sunday, but your mind will never go somewhere that your body will never go somewhere your mind and heart haven't gone first.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think sometimes we don't put good boundaries around our thoughts, and then all of a sudden we show up to a battle defeated because we've been thinking the enemy's thoughts for us, so we don't even feel like we can do anything against him.
Yeah.
You've got to put some really good boundary lines around your thoughts, and some of those things for me have been what I feel will determine what I meditate on.
Yeah.
So if all you do is watch Instagram, TikTok, TV shows, and talk, and then the music you listen to, you got to understand input only comes from 2 ways, your eyes and your ears.
Yeah.
Yes. Come on.
So just do a bit of an input study on yourself and ask yourself, what's the majority of what you're bringing in?
Yeah.
It's so powerful. I think Jake preached it once, that the guy that I think put either Facebook, TikTok, or one of those social media platforms together, and it's in that movie that's out there, I think The Social Media Dilemma or something, or The Social Network something, whatever it is. But he just said that no matter what he chose, it only took about 5 different posts to change his mind or to start to see his heart change in the direction of a certain argument.
Yeah.
And so at the end of the day, if you're listening to music that is like not really going to do something for your spirit,
Yeah.
and if you're listening and then you're watching things that aren't doing anything for you, and then you're meditating and scrolling on things that aren't doing anything for you, and then you've also been told by people that are lowering the bar for what Christian living is because we think it's unobtainable because of the society we're kind of in, and also because I think it's great for a new Christian to set this bar, but once you've been a Christian for more than like a 6 month period, this bar's not going to help you.
Yeah.
We say things like 10 minutes a day in the Word is going to be all right.
Yeah.
How?
Yeah. Yeah.
You got to understand, God's not the only one preaching when you wake up.
Yeah. That's right.
The enemy's talking.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
And he's not, as well, can we just say this, like as Christians, we downplay the devil.
Yes.
But you got to understand, like he's been at this longer than you and I.
Yes. Right.
He knows your fears.
Right.
And he's not just a stupid and overt devil as well.
Yeah.
He plants small seeds that are building blocks to big problems.
Yes.
You don't guard your thinking
Yeah.
by changing the way you get input.
Yeah.
I promise you that things will shift.
Yes.
And even on another level, I think another area that we don't shift our mind is educate yourself on your calling.
Yes.
Yes. So good.
That's a good.
Educate yourself on your calling. It might not be, we tend to be so arrogant that we call things difficult instead of saying that we're doing it wrong.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you're not an expert in the matter, how do you know it's difficult? Do you know what I mean? Like, it's difficult to do certain things when you don't understand the concept of leverage. You can't lift certain things when you don't understand leverage, but you use leverage and all of a sudden things are easy.
Yeah.
Most of the time, things are difficult because we're doing them wrong. And I think one of the greatest mental battles you could put in there is educate yourself on your calling. Why? The greatest battlefield you're going to walk into is your calling.
Yeah.
It's where the devil's going to wait for you. It's where your greatest challenge is going to be.
Yeah.
And I think we often don't become experts in the very thing that God's called us to do. And we don't read books on it. We don't talk to other pastors or other leaders or other business owners. We don't talk to people, and I think it becomes a real massive challenge. And I think for me, the last thing on the battle, for in the headspace area, one of the greatest weapons is accurate expectations. Accurate expectations are not a killer of faith. They're a breeding ground for it. If you don't know what the usual is, how do you know you actually even have faith? If it's not usual for something to move, I don't know, for church to grow beyond 1,000 people in 4 years, then, you know what I mean? Fine. Now I have a parameter. I have a limit. I can test that with some faith. Yeah. But faith should never kill you. I was just reading in Proverbs, and it says, hope deferred makes the heart grow sick, but a dream fulfilled is like a wellspring, or it brings life. Yeah. My take on that is different than I've ever read it before. Hope deferred is not when you are standing in hope and it doesn't happen. Yeah. Hope deferred for me is a deferment, like a deferred payment, which means my hope is not present with me now. I've set my hope on things over there.
Wow, yeah, that's good.
I've set my hope on the day when.
Yeah, right.
So hope deferred for a single person is your hopes for happiness is somewhere over there on the day you get married.
Wow.
Hope deferred for a pastor is somewhere over there when he's finally known. Or the church is big enough, or the building. But if I don't have hope today, if I don't have hope for today, and I put my hope on deferment for a better day, then the reality is I've lost sight of the fact that God is doing something here. And when you talk about unmet expectations, I think so many of us, our expectations are hope deferred. When I finally get here, things are going to be good. And the problem is that that's a forever later mentality. And if you don't know how to love the work and love what God is doing in today, what's your hope for today? Set small hopes, and I think you end up in great big places. My hope today is to love my children, pour into 4 people, get a God word for 4 people, and get one strategy that's going to move our church this month. Imagine if that's like a very simple hope that God can show up to. But if my hope is, man, I can't wait till we're 10 million, well, that could take a while. And because my hope is so far from me, it feels like my help is so far from me. So I think one of the greatest things is accurate expectations and find hope today. Find hope in what you do today. Find the meaningfulness of what God has got you in today. Let me I'll segue into, I can say what I said pretty quick, but is there another one that anyone read that, go through the list of the comments, is there one more that everyone's like, dang, I would love if someone spoke on this? Just drop a fire emoji on the comment, and the one with the most fire emojis, I'll finish up with, because I've got something short that I can finish for our staff here on this one, which I just want to talk into the heart of People Church for a sec.
Can I ask a question on one of the points that you spoke on?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, you talked about in seasons when you're tired, it's not about running at the same speed, but maintaining the same effort. And I guess I'm wondering if you could speak to, like, in seasons, this is not my current season, but thinking back to other seasons that I didn't maintain the same effort because I was really hurt. Like, how do you, and like part of that, obviously, decluttering the heart. Mm-hmm. But like, how can you speak to maintaining the same effort when it feels painful to keep going? And
yes. Yeah, that's exactly my point of that exercise. And the reason is, understand this, right? The next point was you have to rest well in that physical battle, because not everybody can run forever, right? So just know that the rest well is there. But in the subject of how do you run when it hurts, I learned that from running in real life when it hurts. Yeah. Because if I can control if I can control my physical, I think that's the greatest battle.
Yeah.
And so in years, like even the most recent difficult physical thing I did was a place called Strive Village, which some of you interns had to do, Sarah had to do. I've done a lot of workouts, and then some of the guys from our church that have played in the NFL have done probably way more drastic workouts than anyone. And yet they said this is the hardest thing they've ever done. And honestly, when you push your body to this place where your muscles are cramping and they can't pick up a weight, but you've got to keep going, and you push through, it's like you build up a picture of sustainability.
Yes.
And what you learn is that pain is not a reason to stop. Like, you don't just have to stop in pain. And now let me talk to a practical repercussion on how that builds your life. Again, still need rest. We still need to address things in our life, but you can push through pain. If I was to alter the way that I run in ministry, marriage, or fatherhood, or friendship, according to the moments that bring pain, I would be known as a very inconsistent person.
Yeah.
Because I think Nosa posted something about Nipsey, and Nipsey Hussle was saying when you're running for the actual dream, you should feel stretched. Because you're pushing, you're pressing, you're right in the precipice of greatness or change or growth. And if you think of growth even physically, which this is the way that pyramid run was explained to me. I only learned it because I was injured and I had 2 to 3 weeks to get back to, it was tryout season. And the guy, a friend of mine was a coach, and he said, man, do this because think of your fitness like an elastic band that will never go back. The reason that we do a pyramid run is after 2 laps, you should be at your pain barrier. If you don't give up on that pain barrier, imagine it's an elastic band that's going to keep stretching and won't come back. So next week when we do this, you pushed your limits to a place that they've never been before, but they won't come back.
Right.
So the same thing goes when I learn to shoulder internal pain and the pain of certain things. What I'm teaching myself is that my internal pain is not an excuse for either bad behavior, because in the past when I've been hurtful, I've been snippy. Like when I've been hurt, I've been short. When I've been hurt, I've not wanted to preach. And it's just not life. Like I've got to learn how to carry the dream when I'm still sore.
Yeah.
And so the amount of messages I've preached at my wits' ends, you wouldn't even know.
Wow.
The amount of pastoral meetings that I've sat hearing another person's problems and my problems are burdening me to a point where I don't know if I can continue.
Yeah.
I've had lots of, some of you even know that during pandemic, I had a huge medical challenge, but I still preached, I still showed up, I still praised, I still worshipped. Because I think we have to learn what it is to finish a race. And I think that the only reason we stop when we feel pain is because we were taught that it should be in stride and easy.
Yeah.
But I've never done proper exercise that yields a reward or places on a podium that didn't come with pain.
Yeah.
Which a lot of us even want to put down ministry sometimes because it's difficult. Well, no one ever said it was easy.
Yeah. That's true.
There's a reason Jesus says, take up your cross. We avoid verses like take up your cross and follow me.
Yeah.
We avoid verses like if I was hated, then you'll be hated. We avoid verses like I'm sending you out like sheep amongst wolves.
Yeah.
We avoid verses where Jesus was rejected. We avoid these verses because we don't want it. But even we avoid verses like go, Ananias, pray for Paul. I've shown this man how much he must suffer for my name. We don't realize that serving God is both a privilege and a sacrifice, which is what makes it an actual act of worship. Because worship is when I lay something down on the altar. So when I'm serving every day and in the midst of my pain, I'm not denying that it's there, because if I don't take care of it, it will take me out.
Yeah.
But what I am saying is that I am well aware that this is not glitz, glamour, good times, and all the greatness. No, this is a yoke that is easy. Because it's easy to say yes to God because it's just a no-brainer, because I'm convicted and I know that his direction is going to be better than anything. But the reality is every day I am worshiping God with my yes.
Yeah.
Even the idea of like, if I'm really honest, like there's elements that I love Chicago, and some days I flippin' love Chicago and sometimes I flippin' hate it.
Yeah.
Like, but honestly though, right? Like, am I called to the city? No. I'm called to people.
Yeah.
So put me in any city. I'm called to obedience over being called to a city.
Come on.
I'm called to obedience over being called. So this is an actual living sacrifice where you pour yourself out, because Jesus set the model for that. And he shows it when he says to his Father, if you could take this cup from me, take it. So if I mean, who wouldn't pray, Lord, if you could get me to minister in Hawaii, take me. Or whatever favorite city is yours, because it's relative. Some of you would die having to be in the heat of Hawaii, but you love a city. But God might call you somewhere that's not a city.
Yeah.
There's a reason he says those that leave family members for me will there'll be a blessing 7 times, sevenfold. God understands, and the sacrifice will never be greater than reward.
Yeah.
But if we build ministry and consistency on the premise of favorable context, we will never be consistent.
Yes. Yeah.
That's good.
Very good.
Yeah.
Come on. Very good.
Can I ask a clarifying question?
Yeah, go for it.
Sometimes God does call you to a specific city though, so there's the obedience in that.
But that's my point. I'm called to this city, but I'm not called to the city because I love this city or I'm called to the city. This is where he wants me to serve. But what people interpret called to this city means, or when they go, I don't just love this city. And, and this is not just any time in people church, and I think in any urban setting, people say this all the time because it's true. Like, a city is fun when you're young,
Yeah.
but what do you do when you've got children?
Yeah.
And you're hearing gunshots and there's carjackings all the time.
Yeah.
And there's these realities. Sometimes this is just real,
Yeah.
right? And sometimes when I say God doesn't call you to a city, what I'm saying, or I never said God doesn't call, or if I did, I didn't mean that. What I mean is that I'm not here because God said, or I love Chicago and I feel called to Chicago. We romanticize calling
Yeah.
Yeah.
and we subtract sacrifice.
Yeah.
We think calling is where you're going to have fun, where it's
Right.
always
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
No, I've been called to drink from the same cup as Jesus
Yeah.
Yeah.
to an extent, and to do what he has done. So when I go to a city, he might call me to a city, but the idea of calling is not that it's going to be all fun and games.
Yeah.
Right.
And if all we do is that, I think it's where we lose the joy. I think when we realize that, we find the joy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because the joy starts to come from a different place. He is Emmanuel. He is ever with us. He's present, right? And the idea of hope deferred is a really powerful statement for who God is. He's the same yesterday, today, and forever, right? So the beauty is this: when you can actually fall in love with your relationship with God, and that is your source of joy, not what God can do for you. And by the way, that's not just a new Christian problem. That is a pastoral problem.
Yes.
Yeah.
When we feel that God can bless us with the congregation we want, with the budget we want, with the road we want, with the building we want, if that's what we're finding joy, then we're actually still seeking the Savior for what he wants to provide, what we need him to provide us. But can you get up every day in the now and actually have a relationship with God that fills you now?
Yeah. Come on.
It's not every day. We have our human days, but I'm just saying, if that's your theme,
Yeah.
then the city becomes irrelevant.
Yeah.
More than anything, God doesn't want me to save the dirt of this place. It's the people that sit here.
Yeah.
So I don't care about the geography. I care about the assignment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. It's good. It's really good.
I had a comment. When you were talking about seeking God for what he provides for you, I was reading about Abraham and how he was promised descendants, and so he's thinking, okay, Isaac, this is the way that this is gonna unfold. So thank you, God, hallelujah. Like, I have the tangible. But then he asks him to sacrifice it, and it didn't make any sense to him, but he still did it. And sometimes we can see that the provision is not just at face value, but God wants to do something so grand that you would almost say no to it at first because it would just be too big. But yeah, I thought that.
Yeah, fully.
Yeah.
That's amazing, Drew. Any other questions on this subject today?
I don't know if there's gonna be enough time or not, but you said a statement in terms of the mental, because sometimes we call something difficult that we're just doing incorrectly. And I don't know if there's a practical example that you have, because I feel like that would help put it into full perspective, I guess.
Yeah. There's so I think two areas I think that. I'll go into let me pull an example from when I was building the house, because there were so many things I did incorrectly because I never did that. And I think sometimes it was as easy as the way I was holding and utilizing one of the tools. And literally it was straining. And when it was straining, it started to tax my mind. You know, because you look up and I'm like, man, I still got to lay all this floor. I've laid 5 planks, and those 5 planks took me 5 hours. Like, what the heck? How am I going to get this done? And I'm sore and I'm tired and it's difficult. And then you look up on YouTube and you realize that the reason it's difficult is the way you're laying it down and the way that you're using the tool. And then you're like, oh, and then all of a sudden, the next bit you lay a third of the floor in the same amount of time, and it's not as straining. And I think quite often our biggest problem isn't difficulty, it's lack of progress.
Yeah.
And that becomes a mental strain because we know that we have a certain finite bit of energy, and when you realize that this is going to take forever, it's really, really difficult. So there's that aspect, right, where you're just doing it wrong. I'll go into another more ethereal practical, and it was a simple mental loop that helped me deal with large task lists, difficult situations, and feeling overwhelmed. And it was simply something I learned, I think it was from Extreme Ownership, and it was assess, prioritize, execute. And what I had to learn is that quite often I was approaching overwhelming seasons in sporadic shoot from the hip manners. So what I was doing is like, I'm just going to do the thing in front of me. And the problem was that the thing in front of me often created more work because it wasn't the most linear thing to do next, and it wasn't the thing to be done in that time and place. So when I learned this mental loop, what I realized was that actually overwhelming is not as difficult as I think. What it is usually just unknown and unclear. And I just want to encourage you to put that as a statement for yourself. Overwhelming is typically not difficult. It's just unknown and unclear. So when you assess the situation, you take a bit of time to go slow so you can go fast. Then you prioritize, then you execute, things shift. And then the last one I'll say is a relational construct, and I'll talk about it in the concept of our marriage. I thought in the first few years, our marriage was really difficult, and that marriage was difficult. And the truth was that in some aspects, I was just doing it wrong. Like, I was doing conversation with Audrey wrong. You know what I mean? Like, I was coming too aggressively. I was challenging everything straight away, or even simple bits of feedback, right? If she asked me feedback on her worship leading or her latest message, I would treat her like a peer, not like my wife. Wow. So I would just go straight in, right? And just say, this is what you got to shift. This is what you got to change. And then, you know, and then even like another one, like leading with her. Well, what I learned to do is first start with affirming what was great. Yeah. When someone preaches, they just emptied themselves spiritually of everything they've been building up. Right. And then on top of that, it's a very like vulnerable thing to do. Yeah. And when we don't know how to affirm, hey, by the way, I just want to make sure you know this is fantastic. Yeah. Don't change this. This was powerful. Yeah. Wrap it up this way. That becomes feedback that's palatable and easy, you know what I mean? And I don't always do that, but like every time I do it, the merit is, or the rewards are just, you know, super visible. And then the last thing I'll say is where I had to, while I was doing it wrong and I thought it was difficult, was in leadership with Ords. Like, for a long time, I would speak over her ideas or not welcome her ideas, or I would just, I wouldn't even praise her for leadership. I wouldn't even say that was great. Like, I thought it in my mind, but I wouldn't stop to say it. And all of a sudden, leadership with us was difficult because she didn't feel like she was given a space. And the reality is she wasn't given a space. Although I was like, run and do what you want to do, I didn't also create a space where she knew that I was like going, yeah, that's awesome. And when you're married, you are each other's first source of feedback. And in essence, that's all you really care about is what each other think. You have access into each other's heart that no one else has. So therefore, you've got opportunities. Since you're in a deeper part of their heart, it's also a softer part of their heart. And if you run around in that place at that depth without the same sort of care that it requires, you do damage type thing. And so I had to kind of learn how to affirm what was already great in her, but speak it. So all of a sudden, when I started doing that, leading with my wife wasn't difficult because she felt like she had the space to speak up whenever she wanted to, and I was listening. And there's been so many of those areas of my life where I've just been quick to label them as difficult or spiritual or the devil's against me. And the reality is the devil wasn't against me. I just cooked that food on way too high a heat. Like, there's just things we don't know how to do. Yeah. And I think if you were to maybe go through all the list in your ministry and all the things in your life that aren't working, and just assume that might be 40% of it skill set and knowledge base, it's quite freeing. Yeah. Because not everything's the devil.
Yeah.
Does that answer it, Fallon?
Yeah, thank you so much.
All right, I want to say two quick things. A lot of this actually covered what I wanted to bring. I wanted to talk about spiritual health, and I wanted to talk about staying in a good place. And I want to encourage you, just a simple practical that I think would help you a lot is find time to get away and re-see the vision that God has given you for your season.
Come on.
If you're a married couple, take time away and get a vision from God for your marriage.
Yeah.
Just for your marriage.
Yeah.
Not for the church or the ministry you're building. Just get a vision for your marriage. What's the tone of your marriage going to be? What testimony does he want to build in your marriage? Just alone. What's he wanting to do in that? I think that is a really powerful thing to do that I was never asked or taught to do. And I thought, man, like that would have been so useful early on in my days. And why that speaks to the two groups here is that if you're not married, it's all about you. Go and get God again on what he showed you. Because vision leaks.
Right, come on, yeah.
And if you're not going back in to the moments with God to speak back over it, you're going to miss things. And sometimes God has given me supernatural visions that have played out in my actual vision that I have not aptly interpreted until 5 years later.
Yeah.
So hold the vision before God,
Yeah.
because quite often what you'll realize is you've given up on too much of it, grown familiar with a lot of it, and missed a portion of it.
Yeah.
If you're going to serve and run because God called you, you've got to stay making sure that you know the vision. Those without a vision cast off restraint.
Yeah.
So the only reason you have boundaries, and boundaries increase your ability to go further, is because you have a vision. Get a vision. Don't just say yes and stick to it. You've got to keep looking at the finish line and the prize that's waiting for you mid-race. So encourage you to do that. And then I spoke to the spiritual thing, guys. Just get a revelation from God. Get healthy. Good things happen from it. Love ya. It's been awesome to do Starfy Roulette. I hope it blessed you. Hope it was good.